Hello folks, in this video I'm going to look at adding in some actions and make these players fight each other. Now because it's a turn-based game, I need to define a few variables that are going to control who's going first and then who follows afterwards. So right at the top of the code where I have my game window being created, just below that I'm going to add a new section where I'm going to define my game variables. So I'll add a comment to say define game variables and then I'll begin creating them. So the first one I want is current underscore fighter equals 1. So this just kicks off and says the knight is going to be the first to go. But then I also need to know how many there are so that when it gets to the end, it can reset and then the fighters start again from the beginning. So I say total fighters equals 3 because I've got a knight and 2 bandits. But then the other thing I need to consider is that if I just cycle through them all, it's going to go way too quickly. I need to make sure that each of the fighters actually waits a little bit before making their action. So I need some kind of cooldown and a wait time. So I'll say action cooldown equals 0. We start off at 0 and increase it. But then the action wait time is 90. So this is how long I want each of them to wait before the act. So with those defined, I can now go all the way down to my main game loop and start adding this code in. So I'm going to do that just underneath where I've got my knight and bandit update and draw methods, but above my event handler. So I'll add it in here. I'll add a comment to say player action. And to start off, it's quite straightforward. I need to know whether the player is actually alive first of all before they can do anything. So if you remember, my fighter class had an alive variable. So I can say if knight alive equals true, or you could also just say if knight alive, it will do the same thing. So if knight alive equals true, then I want to know if it's his turn. So if current fighter equals 1, that means that it's the knight's turn to act. So that means that he's ready to act, but I want him to wait a certain amount of time. So I need to increase his cooldown value. So we'll increase this by 1 until it eventually reaches the wait time that I set at the beginning. So now if action cooldown is greater than or equal to the action wait time, then he's ready to attack. So I can say here, look for player action. And at the moment, the only one I've got is attack. So I'll put that in here. And the way I'd like to do these attacks, I don't actually have any way of doing it right now, but I like to add a method within my fighter class, which is going to take care of all the attacking for me. So although that's not coded in just yet, I am about to do that, so I will call that method now. So I'll say knight.attack, and then I will need to give it some kind of target. And in this case, I'm just going to set it to bandit 1 for now. So after the knight has attacked, that means it's the next fighter's turn. So I can say current fighter must increase by 1, and the action cooldown must be reset back to 0, so that the next fighter also has to wait to take their turn. Now if I run this code now, it will start off okay, but then when it gets to this point where the action cooldown has reached the action wait time, it will give me an error because the attack method doesn't exist yet. So that's what I need to add in just now. I'll go all the way back up to my fighter class and I will define a new method here. Actually, I'll do it underneath the update method. So I'll keep update up there and then I'll say define def attack. So this says self, and remember it also took a target. So the first thing I want to do is deal damage to the opposing enemy. So deal damage to enemy. And the damage is going to be partially based on their strength value and partially random. So actually before I do this, I need to make sure that I import my random module. So go all the way to the top and say import random. And this will allow you to use random, the random functions. So come back down to the attack method. Now we can just generate a random number. So I'll say rand equals random.randint, which is a random integer, and I'll say between -5 and +5. So then the damage that I want to do to the enemy or any target will be damage equals self.strength. So either the knight or the bandit's strength plus this random value. So the strength at the moment, I think I've got 10 for knight and then 6 and 6 for the 2 bandits. So it's going to be basically plus or minus 5 on each of those values. So they're always going to do some kind of damage, but it could vary by a reasonable amount here. So with the damage calculated, I need to make sure that I remove that amount from the enemy HP. So remember, I've got this target here, and this target is going to be one of my fighter instances. So I can just say target.hp is reduced by damage. So that's the damage done. So let's run this code and see if anything happens. There you go. So the player took his turn and he dealt 14 damage to Bandit 1. Of course, there was no animation, nothing really happened, and now the turn is moved over to the next player, but I haven't added in the code for the bandits yet. So basically the game, as far as it's going to go, is stuck now. Now the reason that there was no animation is if we come back up to where I've got my init method, I have the animations, remember, stored in this animation list, but this animation list is controlled by the action. So the action is what determines whether I'm loading the idle images or whether I'm loading the attack images and so on. So the action begins at 0 and I've never actually changed it. So what I need to do is change this action to 1 every time I run the attack method. And that way the animation is going to update as well. So I can come back down to my attack method, and underneath here I'll just add a little comment to say set variables to attack animation. So the first one is my action. I need to say that the action is now 1, which is attack. And I need to make sure that the frame index is reset so that the animation restarts at the beginning. So the frame index becomes 0. And I also need to make sure that I record the current time so that the animation is timed correctly. So this is just done with pygame.time.getTicks as I've done for the previous animations. So let's run this again and watch what the player does this time. So you see, now he's attacked. However, he's stuck in the animation loop now. And that again is because I've set the action to 1, but I've never reset it back to 0. Because 0 is idle, I need to reset it back to that position once this attack animation is complete. So if I come back up to my update method, which is where I handle the animation, if you remember this line or this section here looks at whether I've come to the end of the animation sequence, and it resets it back to the start. But really what I want to do is, whenever I finished any of the animation sequences, I always want the player or the bandits to switch back to the idle state. So rather than setting frame index back to 0, I want to reset that, and I also want to reset action back to 0. So I could code that in here, but it's something that I might have to call a few times. So instead, I'm just going to create a new method, which is going to be called idle. So above attack, just to keep things in the same order, I'll say def idle. And this just takes self. It doesn't need any more arguments. And actually, I can just copy this section from the attack method because it's basically the same thing, except I'm setting the action back to 0. So all this method is going to do is just reset my animation back to the idle state. And now I can say up here within the update method, when we come to the end of the animation sequence, rather than resetting it back to 0 as is, let's just reset it to idle, self.idle. So let's run the code again, and the player should attack, and in the end of the sequence he resets back to the idle state. So that's starting to come together, but now I need to add in the bandits. I need to add in the AI so that they actually fight back. At the moment it's just the knight that's able to fight. So I can just add in more or less the same code underneath here, and I'll add a comment to say enemy action, and just be mindful of the indentation here just so it doesn't get confusing. So this enemy action is just indented once within the while loop, just the same as most of the other code. Now here I need to make sure that I'm iterating through the bandits. Because I've got 2 of them stored in a list, I need to use a for loop and check each one rather than going through them individually and typing the code out twice. I'll use my for loop and I'll look for bandit in my bandit list. However, there's a catch here, because not only do I need to iterate through each of the bandits, which is going to give me the bandit instance, I also need to keep a count of them. So I need to know if I'm in index 0 or index 1 of this list. So that means that I need to use enumerate within this for loop. So instead of just saying in bandit list, I will say in enumerate, brackets, bandit list. And at the beginning here, I will add a second variable. So I'll say for count, comma, bandit. So basically this just splits it in 2. So it iterates through the bandit list and gives me an instance of it in this bandit variable, but it also keeps a running count of it using enumerate, and that's what this count variable is. So this is going to go 0 for bandit 1, then 1 for bandit 2, and if I had more of them, it would just continue that way. And it just means I can keep a running count and use that if I need to within here. So now that I've got my for loop, I need to know, just the same as I did up here, whose turn it is. So I can say if current fighter equals. Now I would say 2 because that's essentially the next player, right? It starts off as current fighter equals 1 for the knight, and then it switches to 2, which should be my first bandit. However, because I'm also counting through them, I need to make sure that I add that in here. So this is what's going to control who's going first, right? It just means that I iterate through this for loop, and then I check if the current fighter is 2, which will be bandit 1, or if current fighter is 2 plus 1, which is the bandit after in the list. So depending on whose turn it is, I'll do the exact same check as above. I'll say if bandit.alive. Now remember, I don't need to say bandit 1 or 2 because bandit is this here. So it's taking either bandit 1 or bandit 2, depending on where I am within the list, and saving it to this variable here. So when I call this instance of it, I'm basically referring to either bandit 1 or 2, depending on the for loop. So if bandit alive equals true, then I do the exact same thing. I say action cooldown increased by 1, and then if the action cooldown is greater than or equals to the action wait time, so exactly the same as I did with the knight, then now we can attack. So I'll add a comment to say attack. Now it's the bandit.attack, and now this time the target is the knight. So they're both attacking the knight, and again I need to increase the current fighter. So current fighter goes up by 1, and the action cooldown gets reset back to 0. But one more thing I need to add in here, which I didn't add for the knight, is because there's more than one bandit, I need to add an extra check here. So I've got an if statement here. If the bandit is alive, then we do this. But what if the bandit isn't alive? Then the game is just going to hang because the current fighter state is going to stay exactly the same. So we're always going to be waiting for that bandit to act, but he's not alive, so he can't act. So that means that within the same indentation, I need to add an else statement. So if the bandit is not alive, well, we just have to skip his turn. So we say current fighter is the next one in the line. So let's run this code and see what happens now. The player attacked, and then the bandits attacked straight after. Now, of course, everything's finished again. And that's because the current fighter has gone beyond these 3 guys, and there's no one else to fight. We haven't reset it back to the knight. So that bit is quite straightforward. We just come back out here and say, if all fighters have had a turn, then reset. So if current fighter is greater than total fighters, then current fighter equals 1. So if I run this code again now, everyone's had a go, and now it resets back. And you notice now the health has gone off the scale. This bandit technically should be dead. The knight's about to die as well, but everything just keeps going. And that's simply because I haven't coded any of that in just now. So I can add that in. That's pretty straightforward. But before I do, I did notice that there was something going wrong in that if you pay attention here, as soon as the knight acts, the bandit attacks him back straight away. I've just noticed I made a pretty silly typo here. I've actually forgot to type equals 0. So when the knight was finishing his action, it was just going straight onto the bandit. So now it's a bit better. Now he's waiting for his turn, and it reverts back to the knight, and it continues. The next thing to add then is just to make sure that when one of the players or the fighters does actually die, they don't just keep fighting and their health doesn't just keep going below 0. And that's an easy enough check. If I come back up to my fighter class and go down to this attack method, so at the moment I've got this section here where I'm calculating the damage and I'm saying target HP is reduced by the amount of damage. Well, after that, let's just say check if target has died. So I can say if target HP, so if their health is less than 1, well, that means they're dead. So I'll just reset their health to 0 because it's either 0 or it's less than 0, and I don't want their health to be remaining negative. And then I need to make sure that I set their alive variable to false. Now, what this is going to do is make sure that if one of the bandits dies, they're going to skip a turn and it's going to continue on to the player. So if I try and run this again and see if I can actually kill that bandit in time before the others kill me. So that bandit is now done, and you notice he's now skipping his go. So it's only the knight and the second bandit that are fighting. Of course, my target is still bandit 1, so I keep trying to hit him even though I can't, and he's dead and his health is already at 0. So that's all fine, it's all working well. However, I'm not actually able to control any of it. The knight is just attacking by himself and he attacks the bandit automatically. So I need to be able to choose who I want to attack, and I want to be able to make that action. Before I do that, I just want to add in a little feature where I'm looking for whether the mouse has gone over one of the bandits, and then I want to change the cursor into a little sword. So before I do that, I need to make sure I load that sword image in. So I come all the way back up to the top of my code where I'm loading these images up here, and I just add a comment to say sword image. And I can copy this code for the panel image because it's pretty much the same thing. I just changed that to sword, and then I've saved it in the icons folder, but it's called sword.png. So with that loaded, I can now go back down to where I'm controlling my actions, and I want to do these checks before. So this is where the actions are being executed, but I want to determine them before that happens. So I'll add the code in above that. So I'll define a couple of variables here to start with, or rather I'll reset these variables. I'll define them above before that. So let's say reset action variables. And actually before this I'll add an overall comment for this entire section, which is control player actions. So the variables I'm going to reset, and I'll need to define them as well, is attack. So attack is going to start off as false. Potion is going to start off as false. I'm not coding this in just yet, but I will add it as a placeholder. And then my target is going to start off as none. I don't want to have anyone to attack until I've chosen somebody. So now I'll go to the top of the code where I've got my variables being defined, and I'll add those ones in here. So underneath my action wait time, I can say attack equals false, potion equals false. And then another one that I'm going to need is clicked. So I'll say clicked equals false as well. And that's just going to look for a mouse click. So with those defined, I can come back down to where I was working in this area here on the actions. And I can start looking for this mouse over condition. Basically, this is going to be done in a few stages. First of all, I want to know where the mouse is. Then I want to check for collision between the mouse and one of the bandit rectangles. And then if those conditions are met, then I hide the mouse cursor, and instead I show the sword icon and I position it where the mouse is. So first of all, let's find out where the mouse position is. Pos equals pygame.mouse.get_pos. Now that I know that, I can look for collision with the bandits. So again, I use that same for loop and say for count bandit in enumerate bandit list. So remember, this is exactly the same thing as I've done below. I'm just working through the bandit list, picking out the instances in this bandit variable, but at the same time keeping a running count of where I am. Now I can look for collision with each one. So I can say if bandit, which is the instance. Now each instance has a rectangle, because remember I created a self.rect variable within the class. So if that rect has collided with the mouse, now the mouse is just an x and a y coordinate. So that's an individual point, and PyGame has different types of collision, like collision with rectangles, etc. So the one I'm looking for is collision with a particular point, and that is collide point. And the argument that it needs is the point coordinates, which is pos. That's where the mouse is. So that means that if I've moused over one of the banded rectangles, I can now hide the mouse, which is done by saying pygame.mouse.set_visible and in brackets false. So that's going to hide the mouse, but now we need to show the sword in its place. So show sword in place of mouse cursor. And that's straightforward. I just need to blit that image onto the screen as I've done before. So screen.blit sword_image, and the coordinates are just pos, which is where the mouse is. All right, so let's run this code and see how it works. If I mouse over, you notice it just instantly changes to a little sword. Now when I mouse away, the mouse doesn't come back, it's disappeared. And that's because I've not told it to return. I've set it to false here, but I've never set it back to true. So actually I want to copy this line, and I want to put it right up here where I'm resetting my variables. I'll add a little comment for it, just to explain what it is. So make sure mouse is visible. So the mouse is going to start off visible, so I'll set this back to true, and it means that at each iteration of the game loop, the mouse is visible. But as soon as these conditions are met, I'll hide the mouse and I'll show the sword. So if I rerun this now, it turns to a sword, I move away, it turns back to a mouse. So that's all working fine. However, they're still just fighting each other with no input from me. I can't click on anything. So the next thing I want to do is look for clicking. Now that's easy enough. if you come back down here, remember I had this event handler, which is only at the moment looking for the quit event. I can add in more events here, and the one I want to add in is a mouse click. Now that's quite straightforward. I just add an extra line, say if event.type equals, so it's the same thing, PyGame, but this time all caps, mouse button down. Basically, if the mouse has been clicked, then that clicked variable, which I defined earlier, is set to true. However, we add an else statement here because I also need to know if the mouse is being released, then clicked becomes false. Right? Because otherwise it's just going to keep thinking that the mouse button is being held down even when you've released it. So if I run this again, nothing actually changes. I can click and I know that it's going to be changing my clicked variable, but it's not actually doing anything because I'm not processing that click yet. So if I come back up to where I'm working on this player actions code, this is where I want to be looking for that click. Now at the moment the conditions are I'm checking for each of the individual bandits and then I'm checking if the mouse has collided with them. So most of the work is already done. Now I just need to check if I've clicked the mouse. So say if clicked equals true, that means that I've moused over and I've clicked on one of the bandits. So I can say my attack variable becomes true. No, this is the attack variable up here. So this is just controlling what actions I want the player to take. But the other thing I want is I want to give him a target. So I say target equals bandit list, which is my overall list of bandit instances. And now I can access the bandit I want based on this count value, because I've either clicked on bandit 1 or bandit 2. That's why I'm using this enumerate value here. So if I put count in here, it's going to tell me which of the bandits I've actually clicked on, and that's going to become my target. If I run this code again, I should be able to change my target halfway through. So the next attack, it didn't work. Next attack should have been against the second one, but I must have missed something here. Oh, of course, yeah. I haven't fed that target back into here. I'm still telling the bandit, the knight, to always attack bandit 1. So if I change this to target instead and run that, and if I click on the second, yeah, so this makes sense. Essentially what's happening is it's looking for the target, but it's only going to work as long as this condition up here is met. Otherwise the target is going to be reset to none. So it's looking for none and it's failing here. So I want to add a little bit more code to this player action section because I'm pretty much done with the section up there. It's now working that I'm able to hover over one of the bandits and I'm able to click and that gives me a target. But now I need to add a few more checks into this bit. So where I've got my player action, I need to just make sure that I'm checking for having an actual target. So where I've got attack, I'll just add an if statement here. So I say if attack equals true, because remember attack is always set to false at the beginning of the loop, and then it's only set to true if I click on one of the bandits. So if attack is true and target is not equal to none, so I actually have a target to attack, then I can indent all of this section here, and only then will I actually attack one of these guys. So let's run this again, and I'll click on that bandit, and there you go, I've attacked the second bandit. So now there's no action. If I click on the first bandit, I attack this one instead. And everyone's still taking their turn as they should be. And when that bandit reaches 0, he's dead, he stops. Now the knight has also reached 0. So although I'm clicking on the other one, I can't continue because in theory the knight is dead. I just don't have the animation for it yet. And that's it. Now the game only runs as long as there's an input. So right now nothing's happening until I click on one of the bandits. If I click on this one, I attack him. And then I have to wait until my turn comes around again. Now I can click the other bandit and attack him, and so on. So the turn-based part of it is now working. The inputs from the player are also working. And there is some logic going on as well with the health, in that once you kill one of the bandits, so if I kill the second one, that essentially ends the game. So I can keep attacking, but everything is over, all the bandits are dead. So that's pretty much for this video. If you found this useful, then please do leave a like. Thanks for watching.